talk about community planning at Brownfield. I know lots about community planning and very little about Brownfield, so bear with me. First slide is just a picture of the Anaconda smelter in Asarco smelter, in East Helena. I just thought that was an interesting photo to put in. But I talk about the top tier of land use planning in Montana, which is the growth policy, which is typically known as a master plan or a comprehensive plan in most other states. So what is a growth policy? Where do Brownfields fit in? Brownfields and local growth policies, and then the importance of a growth policy to Brownfield's project, specifically with regards to, I'll talk about the Old Rosary Hospital in Miles City. So what is a growth policy? It's found under Title 76, Chapter 1, Part 6 of the Montana Code Annotated. Growth policies throughout the state. I apologize, this isn't a PowerPoint, it's a PDF. My PowerPoint will not work, so we're losing all of the animation. The covers you see are Teton County, Billings, Yellowstone, and Lewistown, the growth policies.
Our last session of the day.
Yes, sir.
The kids are starting to lose focus, I think.
Don't worry, I'll keep them awake. The Montana Supreme Court has indicated in case law that the growth policy is considered the preeminent planning tool for comprehensive jurisdiction-wide planning. This is based upon a court case that was decided in 2006. So even our Supreme Court has indicated the preeminence of the growth policy in land use planning. A lot of people ask, why is it a growth policy and not a comprehensive plan or a master plan? Well, in 1999, the legislature of the state passed a new planning statute that changed the term from master plan or comprehensive plan to growth policies. But under our statute, all three terms are synonymous, or even general plan. You'll see general plan, I believe, in California is pretty typical. Also, the legislature established minimum requirements for growth policies. Essentially, there's a minimum checklist that a jurisdiction has to meet to create such a document. The big difference between Montana's master plan growth policy statute is that it's optional. It is not mandatory for any jurisdiction in the state to do a growth policy. There are certain reasons you have to do a growth policy, such as if you want to do zoning and other types of specific land use regulations. Essentially, a growth policy is meant to provide a rational framework for decision making. It should allow a jurisdiction to decide where its resources are going to be committed, how land use issues are going to be managed, and who's going to do what, where, and when. This is a map of the state of Montana with the municipalities, cities and towns that are either have adopted growth policies or in the process. The dark red, and it doesn't show up very well, I apologize, are those jurisdictions that do have growth policies, and the tan are those jurisdictions in the process. And surprisingly, you'd think most of them would be concentrated in the western part of the state, but that is not the case. This is a map of the counties in the state showing those jurisdictions in the dark brown that do have adopted growth policies, those in tan that are in process, and those in the light red that do not have a document at all. So Brownfields and a growth policy. If a community has a possible Brownfield project, at least in my estimation, it's a good idea to discuss that in the document. And as I talked about earlier, there are minimum requirements for a growth policy, issues that have to be discussed in the map, with maps and text. And I just threw out 4 of them, and one is land use, housing, public facilities, and environment. Those are 4 ideal topics within a growth policy, master plan, general plan, whatever you want to call it, that you'd want to talk about such things. You've got land use issues such as White Pine Sash in Missoula, the Asarco smelter in East Helena, Smelter Hill in Great Falls. Those are perfect land use issues. There's housing issues such as the Old Rosary Hospital in Miles City, the Lewistown Nurses School. With regards to public facilities, you heard about Brewery Flats. Director Opper talked about that earlier, but also there's Centennial Park in Helena. Those are public facilities, and I didn't have any good examples projects that would deal with the environment. But these are topics that need to be discussed in a growth policy, and the ideal places to talk about brownfields. And this is where I lost all my animation. Anyhow, what I wanted to do here is, when I was thinking about brownfields, I was curious to know how many jurisdictions actually talked about brownfields in their growth policies / master plans. So I did a totally unscientific survey of all of the growth policies I could find online, quick and dirty, for the really big jurisdictions like Bozeman, Gallatin County, Billings, Yellowstone, Missoula, Kalispell. And I only found 2 jurisdictions in that totally unscientific survey that talked about brownfields, and it was Bozeman and Great Falls. Bozeman talks about brownfields in 4 of their chapters, and I highlighted that text here, and it talks about, and I'll just read it quickly. Objective 6, develop infill within the existing area of the city rather than developing land requiring expansion of the city's area. And down below it talks about use and publicize incentives such as, but not limited to, and then it talks about including brownfields and the historic core. So the city of Bozeman actually talks about brownfields in their growth policy. The other jurisdiction, and again, I apologize that I don't have the animation here, but this was from the City of Great Falls growth policy. And it was a 2-page section on brownfields in their environmental chapter. And they specifically discussed Smelter Hill, which is an area within the city where they used to refine metals. But they specifically talk about that area of the city as possible development for brownfields. So just a quick survey, I found 2 jurisdictions that talked about brownfields in their document. So moving on, so why would discussing brownfields in a growth policy be important? Well, one, having a well-crafted policy does the following. It provides an opportunity to address needs. We all know that affordable housing, economic development, and those types of issues are huge in Montana. Helps communities focus their efforts and makes projects a lot more competitive for grant monies and funding. We heard it this morning during the presentations, especially with the EPA folks, saying that their grant funding process is very competitive. It is no different for loans, grants, or any of that stuff through the Department of Commerce, the Department of Natural Resources and Conservation. And if you have projects discussed in your growth policy and they're well thought out, they're going to be far more competitive to get those monies. And I'm going to talk quickly about the Old Rosary Hospital project in Miles City because I think it's a good example. In 2004, Miles City did a needs assessment in support of their growth policy, and it identified as a high priority coming up with additional affordable housing. The assessment further identified that the renovation of existing low to moderate income housing was a means to meet this need. And the discussion included the rehabilitation of the Old Rosary Hospital into multifamily dwellings. So their document actually discussed this project. And again, we lost the animation, but this is located in the city center of Miles City. This is a picture of the hospital. It's located about a quarter mile northwest of the VA hospital, if anybody knows where that is, or Miles City Community College. The site contained 3 buildings, 2 built in 1910, 1 in 1950. All have been vacant for over a decade. They had issues of vandalism and asbestos abatement. This is a picture of before. Beat up windows are smashed out. It was in pretty rough shape. And you can't see it, the folks up front here can, but there's some structural issues in the corner of the building there. Cracking, vandalism. Eventually, the Miles City Housing Authority leveraged funds from multiple sources, the Montana Department of Commerce, EPA, the USDA. They put together a beautiful funding package and they converted that building into 21 apartments and demolished the newer, the one built in the third to create or the one built in the 50s to create green space. And hence the animation is gone on this one too, but it shows you the funding package that they ultimately put together, and I'll get to how this ties in with Brownfields. But you can see the money that they put together, and I talked to our folks, I work for the Department of Commerce. You talk to our housing folks and our community development people, they're pretty astounded that they put this project together. That's a lot of money to do this housing project. And you can see the type, it talks about equity was the top one in the building, loan is the next one, and the rest of those were all grants, which the home division of the Montana Department of Commerce, you look down at the community development block grants, housing, community development block grants, planning. So growth policies can make you far more competitive for funds for projects like this. And how this ties in with EPA Brownfields is, again, they leveraged funds. In 2006, the EPA selected the Miles City Housing Authority for a cleanup grant to go in and remove drums of waste material and to abate the asbestos in the building. And this is a picture of the finished product. It's hard to see back there, I know, especially when it's in a PDF, but it's a beautiful structure. It's a heck of a compliment to the city, to Miles City. And with that, I will turn it over to Mary, and we can answer questions at the end because we're all on a tight time frame.
Sounds good. Okay, thank you. And while he's opening the PowerPoint, whoa, sorry about that. I'm Mary Gaddis Shell, and I am here all the way from Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. And first, I just want to say it's a good thing I don't work here, because if I had a view like that, I don't think I could get much done. To orient you a little bit, Lancaster County, Pennsylvania is over in the eastern side of the state of Pennsylvania. It's just east of the Susquehanna River, which is the main tributary to the Chesapeake Bay, and just about an hour and a half west of Philadelphia. Most people think of the Amish when they think of Lancaster County, so I included the picture of the Amish, but I also included the county's growth management policy. There's a perfect segue, Jerry. The area in green, the different shades of green, are the areas of the county which are rural, in essence. There are areas that are ag lands, forested lands, just sensitive areas. The areas in the kind of brown, white, purple, those are our urban areas, and we have a very specific growth management policy for Lancaster County because we are the #1 non-irrigated agricultural producing area in the country. So our farmland is important to us, but also the rural lands are important as a way of life in addition to just being for farming. So what our growth management policy says is, let's redevelop our infill areas, let's develop in the urban areas where we've got the infrastructure, and hence we can save our farmlands. So that's Lancaster County. So it's not just the Amish, just so you know. I'm going to talk a little bit about a couple different projects that we have worked on since we got our first EPA pilot assessment grant back in 1999. And we have evolved over time. This has been my primary responsibility since I joined the County Planning Commission back in 2000. And this is the first project that we worked on. This is a 4.5 acre site right on the outside of a borough. We have in Lancaster County, we have one city that's about 56,000 population. We have 18 boroughs that range from 900 residents up to about 15,000 residents. And then we have 41 townships, which are your more suburban and rural kinds of land areas. And each of those has its own governing body. So as a county employee, I have no control over anything.
That sounds great.
Yeah, it's wonderful. We just come up with the great ideas. So this is right outside of a little borough called Ephrata, and the site had been identified as being blighted and in need of some redevelopment. It had originally been established as a homestead and then had later developed into a hotel, a spiritual retreat center, and a hospital at different times. And basically, the site sat vacant for about 12 years, and a local economic development corporation had been formed to help with the redevelopment of this site. What happened was developers would come in and they could not make a pro forma work. And what we discovered was the only reason they couldn't was they had no idea what the environmental costs were going to be, what the liabilities were associated with the site. So we were like, well, how about if we do a phase one for you? Did the phase one, no recognized environmental conditions. Developer came up with a pro forma that worked, and the site got redeveloped as a hotel. I can't remember what hotel chain it is. Hampton Inns. Hampton Inns and an Applebee's restaurant. The site redevelopment, we were a little disappointed they didn't preserve more of the historic structures on the site. But they did what they had to do. We'd like to see more trees on the site, but it's right on the outside of the borough. You can actually see as you're down on their main street, which has had a lot of streetscaping and pedestrian way improvements made. It's right up there, sits on the hill. It's been a great benefit to the community. And so that was our first project in 2000, a phase one. I think it cost us about $5,000 because at the time, everything was kind of new. There was more involvement with the Economic Development Corporation. Our consultants had to train me. And so that was our first success story. Now let me move on. Our next big project, we got involved with, again, I work for the county planning agency. We got the EPA grant. A community development corporation had taken out a 99-year lease with a school district. The area, the landmass down there in the blue outline, the upper half is a school and the lower half was kind of a community park playground. And it was just totally blighted. There were drug deals going on there all the time. The school district couldn't maintain it, mismanagement of the facilities. So this community development corporation said, you know what, give us a lease on it, we'll get the grant money and we'll redevelop it as a nice neighborhood park. It actually came about in a much more complicated way through a whole streetscape corridor enhancement project. And for those of you who are in the community involvement presentation before this, this was not the project. This site wasn't even on the game plan when they started talking about the corridor improvements. But the community came into the first meeting and said, you know what, if you don't do something about that park, nothing else is going to happen on this whole corridor. Put them back at step one, year and a half of community meetings, and they came up with a plan to redevelop the park. Well, they went out to do some soil borings because they wanted to do some grading on the site, and they found urban fill. And in essence, what appeared to be a park had been a scrapyard dealer, a dry cleaner, and an umbrella handle manufacturer. Lancaster County's largest industry at the turn of the last century was umbrella manufacturing. I learned. We find a lot of umbrella-related industry in Lancaster County. So, hence the value of a phase one. Don't always think that what you see is what you get. We never would have thought that all those things had happened there. So on the 3.5 acres that represents the smaller portion of the site, the community development group called us in. We brought our consultant in. Very visible site. There was a lot of involvement with our consultant and doing outreach to the community about what they would see when they were out with these big drilling rigs on the site. Scattered contamination. This had been an urban redevelopment project from the 70s. And in essence, they had taken 2 city blocks and just raised them, buried the debris, and built the school and the park on top of it. So we went in, we did the phase 2 work, we characterized the site. Did some limited remediation. It really just needed deed restrictions on it. We did a risk assessment and determined that the risk was not acceptable. I hate that terminology, but the risk was not unacceptable. So they were able to move forward with redevelopment of the site. EPA came out to the ribbon cutting. It was a huge success. The park is called Roberto Clemente Park. I don't know if that name means anything to anybody here, but Roberto Clemente was a famous baseball player. His son came to the ribbon cutting when they reopened the park in May of 2005. Now, the one thing about this project, and the thing that I want to really emphasize today, is the importance of cooperating with your state regulatory agency and EPA if they're involved. And we could not have done this project in the time frame that we did and as painlessly as we did had it not been for our relationship with the state regulatory agency. Pennsylvania has a voluntary cleanup program with specific standards that you have to meet, and they're all risk-based. So in essence, we determined that this site needed to meet a residential standard because it's a park, there's public access and so forth. And so we knew what standard we had to meet. When we found the scattered contamination, we had lead and arsenic, and we dug up some hot spots, but then we kept finding more when we would go out to do the post-excavation sampling. So that's when the risk assessment came into play, and we negotiated all of that. Actually, the DEP, our state DEP, is the one who recommended we do that because they said you're going to chase this stuff all over your 3.5-acre site because there was no one source evident. We have a lot of arsenic throughout Lancaster County in our soils. So it was very important that we had them at the table with us and helping us work through the remediation plan here. Also, the organization that did the redevelopment project had very good community relations with the state and was able to secure the funding. This was about $1 million project with a lot of different sources of funding. Now, the project that I want to really focus on even more because they get more complex as we go on is this project. It's in Manheim Borough, which is a borough of about 9,000 residents. The map up in the top left corner in the picture, you can both see the borough's kind of that dense area with the buildings, and then this was an industrial site, about 90 acres total included. It had landfills it was an asbestos manufacturing site. And they had just landfilled the materials, waste materials on site there. They had lagoons where they had also landfilled material right beside a creek. The operation had been run since 1906 in different phases and eventually closed up shop in, I think it was 97, and the property went into bankruptcy. What happened was the bankruptcy sale ended up involving the State Department of Environmental Protection, who required that there be a consent order and an agreement with the buyer that they would go for the voluntary cleanup and they would achieve a cleanup on this site that met a certain standard based on the reuse. So again, we had the state agency cooperating with the municipality and ensuring the protection of the health and welfare of the citizens of the borough and also the redevelopment of the site. What happened there is that the property was purchased out of bankruptcy, and the first parcel, it was subdivided, and the first parcel that was sold was the one on the top left, got a little bit of cash flowing into the project. They then were able to proceed with the remediation. There was a greenfield parcel associated with the project, the kind of rectangular piece that comes down in the bottom you can see in the map up there. That was a greenfield. The developer that purchased it out of bankruptcy sold that off too. Basically, took some of the cream off of the top to finance some of the remediation. but then just found it to be too cumbersome. And so ended up selling a lot of the remaining lands to another developer who came in, and there was more of a partnership that developed with the borough, who had established an economic development corporation, again, that played a pivotal role in being able to secure grant funds to bring in to make this project work. Another buyer came in and bought another parcel down here in the bottom, and he then sold off a couple of parcels. In essence, this project happened in stages and through a lot of partnerships, negotiations. Here are some of the tools and programs that we have found to be most helpful in pursuing these projects. First, I'll start with the US EPA. We'll go from the bottom up. The EPA Brownfield Assessment Grant, because honestly, I say that our consultant trained me, they really did, they had to, and then what I was able to do was go out then and provide technical assistance to a lot of people who didn't need the use of our grant money. They just needed to know who they could talk to at the state. They needed a little bit of assistance in, how do I structure this deal? Who do my partners need to be? What is this Act 2 process, and how can I move through that? So Charlie talked about that this morning in his presentation, the value of that technical assistance. And I read time and again how the grants and everything are really good, but sometimes just that technical assistance from the state, the federal government or the local government can make a lot of difference to people trying to undertake these projects, especially if they don't have the expertise through prior projects. So we've now gotten close to $1 million in brownfield assessment grants. We haven't gone for any of the other grants yet, but that has continued to help fund our projects. We established what's called the Lancaster County Permitting Initiative. That was done by joint resolution between the county commissioners and each of the participating municipalities. And basically what it did was it gave you a single point of contact to get your project through the whole permitting process. We're talking land development, stormwater management, and that played a huge role in the last project that I showed you, because it was a very complicated project. It's an old mill in a floodplain. So I'll show you in a minute all of the different partners that were involved. But it was through the diligence of a coworker of mine who was that single point of contact at the county, who coordinated a lot of the different players from the state to the county engineer's office, who managed the stormwater ordinance and so forth, that helped move that along. Now, we served as a model, in essence, the County Permitting Initiative did, for what became the Brownfield Action Team at the state level. And the Brownfield Action Team is done by, it's a designation that's done by application by a local municipality or redevelopment authority, economic development agency, or so forth, that applies for a single point of contact at the state then, to get you through all the different permits that you may need to get from cleanup or assessment, let's say, to cleanup to redevelopment. And there can be a lot of those. So that has been an invaluable tool for a number of our projects. And then the real linchpin is the state's voluntary cleanup program, which provides you with the uniform cleanup standards. You know what your end point is. And there are different ways you can get there. You know, the state basically doesn't tell you which way you have to go. As long as they believe you did what you needed to do to get there and you can prove it, you're good. So that has been tremendous. It's all based on the future use of the property. So again, you're coordinating your reuse with your remediation cleanup, and standardized review procedures and timelines. So to get a statewide health standard, which is basically no engineering or institutional controls, it's a 60-day review. And if you don't get a letter from the state, it's deemed approved. So they review them and they do it on time. 90 days if you're doing a site-specific or background standard, which is, again, you're using institutional controls, engineering controls, something like that, for your cleanup to meet your standards. And then you get the releases from liability, and there's financial assistance available from the state too for that. So it's a tremendous program, and again, the cooperation that we get from the state is invaluable. The other thing I didn't say about the Brownfield Action Team is that they help with facilitating the assistance of other agencies. So if you've got Department of Transportation assistance that you need, or issues that have to be dealt with, if you've got funding from our Department of Community and Economic Development, again, it gets you that, your application goes to the top of the pile, basically, if you've got this Brownfield Action Team designation. So again, just to reemphasize what you've been hearing all day, partnerships and planning. Community planning is very important because, again, as Jerry said, you want the people you're applying for assistance from to know that this is a priority for your community and that you're not going to run into opposition in the future. They don't want to look bad, they want to look good too, so very important. This is an example of all the people that were involved in that last redevelopment project that I showed you. We had legislative support, private investment, local support. You can see all the different agencies in the local level that were involved. We had public investment. One of the landfills had been retained by the bankruptcy court, and the state agreed to do the cleanup of that landfill. So therefore, the Hazardous Sites Cleanup, or HASCA program, came in. Our local economic development company has been, and that's on the county level, we have a county EDC. They have become a tremendous player in the brownfields arena because they are now taking title to properties, which nobody else is willing to take, and they're able to secure the funding packages that are needed. Consulting services, and then on the right-hand side, that's the state regulatory commitment and all of the different things that one person, Denise Brindley up there, had to coordinate to make this project work. So it was a tremendous project, and as all of them are that happen, they all are complicated. They all take a lot of coordination, a lot of resources, and that's why we do it, so we can keep that. Plus, our urban areas are great too. And if you ever come to Lancaster, come see me, and I'll show you something other than brownfields. I think we're going to take questions at the end. Don't forget it. Thank you.
Oh, thanks. Where do I push that? You just press the arrow down. Down there. Okay, thanks. Okay, we're going to talk specifically about a project that we did in Lewistown that was done in cooperation with many different agencies and groups. This is specifically the Brewery Flats project, located just south of Lewistown along Big Spring Creek. And it's been quite a community effort involving, again, many agencies and local groups that were involved in it. Again, it's a complex of about 100 acres. It's along Big Spring Creek. The Fish and Wildlife Service did purchase 25 acres in the, I'm not responsible for any typographical errors there. In the mid-1980s. The Conoco property consists of about 20 acres that's associated with actually the Brewery Flats complex, and then the Berg bankruptcy property too, which is about 58 acres, which the city of Lewistown has acquired and is now owned. But this property was previously owned by the Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railroads, and it was subject to many railroad activities at that time. And actually the Milwaukee Road that was prior to BNSF actually channelized about 5,000 feet of Big Spring Creek there in the early 1900s. And the Fish, Wildlife, and Parks underwent a very comprehensive stream restoration project there. They actually re-meandered the stream in that area. We'll have some pictures of that, I think. The construction of that began in 1988 and was completed in 2000. And then there was also a 5,300-foot recreational trail that was established on that property as well. And that was called the Berg Trail because we did get an easement at that time before we owned the property from George Berg. So that's kind of the sets the stage there a little bit, I guess. We do have many partners that were involved in that. Well, I might say, though, before we get on to this, that in that site, though, there was, we had many different activities like the coal, oil, gypsum, cattle, and other freight were all shipped from that property over many years, over 70 years, I think it was. There were shops that were on that property that operated for 24 hours a day. And the buildings on that site included many things: ice houses, there was stockyards, office, turntables, the roundhouse. There was coal and oil gas houses, power houses, engine houses, sand drying houses, storage houses. There was carpenter shops, fan houses, water tanks, car repair buildings. It was just a beehive of activity at one time. And the train engines at that time, of course, were coal-fired until about 1957 when they converted to diesel engines at that time. But as you can imagine then, with all this activity going on, there were many discharges over the years on that site. And there were undoubtedly many permit violations for oil and grease as well. But mostly the contamination on the site identified were petroleum hydrocarbons and actually lead contaminated soil. So that was the contaminants of concern that we were dealing with there. But these are the partners that were involved in this, and I think we've had a very good partnership associated with this cleanup activities here with these people that are identified here. We've gotten along, I think, very well with the agencies, and we've enjoyed working with them. And I think without this kind of a partnership that you see here, actually remediation of a site like this would be very difficult to accomplish. And I say that, Betsy, so that you'll give us more money for asbestos abatement on the Paris Laundry site. Okay. Let's see. Some of the main prior work that occurred on the site, on the Conoco property, which is about, what they say, 20 acres, I think, they undertook their action as a voluntary, as a no further action voluntary cleanup plan, I guess. I don't think they ever did get an approved voluntary cleanup plan on that. But they went ahead, it was quite an extensive refinery area there, and they went ahead and land farmed their petroleum products on that, and that's what's going on there now. They actually aerated up so that the hydrocarbons would be subject to decomposition in that manner. I don't think they're ever going to. They thought seriously about giving that site to the city of Lewistown. I don't think they're going to take any action on that now. They'll probably retain it. Again, the stream restoration project, we do have an extensive trail system now that's in Lewistown, and part of that trail system occurs on this Brewery Flats site and the Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. We have 2 trail loops on the Brewery Flats now, and also the Berg Trail that's over a mile in length. So, and then of course the Brewery Flats cleanup, which we'll talk about a little more detail. But the reclamation actually included the removal of the railroad roundhouse that was on the site. There was just tons and tons of surface debris that had to be removed from the site as well. And then also the contaminated soil was removed. The actual cleanup itself started in 2002, but it wasn't completed until 2007. So I would just like to say that, I think any community, if they do have the vision, the perseverance, the patience, the courage to step forward and undertake some of these projects. I think a community, through the cooperation of all the parties, I think many things can be accomplished for the betterment of that community. But it does require working together and working as a team amongst all involved to get some of these things done. Well, how did all this kind of come about? Well, Richard Opper talked about some of the history and how his son Isaac Opper was involved in this too. But way back in 1986, there were some fish tissue samples that were taken by the Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, and that resulted because of the discovery of some PCBs, and their inquiries were made. How did all this, how did this contamination occur? And then later, when the city water line, city's water supply comes from Big Springs, it's south of town, and it doesn't see the daylight of day until it reaches your tap in your house. So it's very pure water. It's not contaminated or not chlorinated or anything, but it's very good water. But when the new water lines were established, there were some test pit samples that were taken in that time period, and they did come clean. There were no PCBs established. But just to make it brief on the PCBs, they did continue to take sediment samples. They thought it was coming from this Brewery Flat site, but that was not the case. They kept taking sediment samples upstream until they finally reached the fish hatchery, and the PCB contamination actually came from the fish hatchery up there. They painted the raceways with PCB-laden paint, and it was chipped off, and of course it goes downstream into the sediment, and picked up by the fish and so forth. So that's where the PCBs, and now there's just a major cleanup planned for the creek itself. It's a blue ribbon trout stream, and it's really too bad that happened, but that's going to be a major job to clean up those sediments. In 1998, the sampling and analysis plan was approved by the EPA, and then in the period from 1999 to 2005, there was actually funding for the cleanup of the Brewery Flat site. So that's kind of the brief history there. In 1999, we did receive $50,000 for assessment there, and just briefly in 2001, we did get from the legislature, this is a Reclamation and Development project grants program for $297,000, almost $298,000. In 2005, we had to go to the legislature again for another $300,000, which were granted for cleanup. And then in 2005, also in associated with our DEG grant from the legislature, there was $150,000 was a EPA state response program that the DEQ administered for us, and of that money, $148,000 plus came to the Brewery Flats project as well. So this is the overall funding summary of the project, and as you can see, there's many sources of funds for the actual assessment and the cleanup as well. The assessment, was over $250,000 just for the assessment part, but then you get down to that where it says RD, the Reclamation and Development Grants Programs. From there on down was the actual cleanup portion of the project, and that was totaled about almost $750,000 for the cleanup itself. So overall, though, when you count all of the assessments and the actual cleanup activities, there was over $1 million that were spent on the Brewery Flats project to remediate basically the lead, the hydrocarbons, the surface debris that was there. And finally, we do have a clean site. We do not have a notice of no further action yet from the DEQ. I think the only thing remaining now is the vegetative establishment, fully established vegetation revegetation on the site. And I think through this growing season that we're just completing, we've got a very good response on the vegetation. I think now all it's going to take is just a buy-off that yes, from the DEQ, yes, the vegetation has been established, and I'm sure at that point we'll get a letter of no further action on the site. So, so that sampling and analysis then led to a decision to proceed with remediation on the site. And the remediation of the contaminated soils. Again, mostly the contaminants of concern were lead and petroleum products. We did go to the 2001 legislature for the RDG grants. Again, that program provided $297,740 in funding. And we did have to go to the Long Range Planning Committee for the for approval by the legislature. These applications go to the Department of Natural Resources and Conservation. They prioritize the projects that were applied for, and then they go to the Long Range Planning Committee and finally to the legislature for a vote. So the Brewery Flats project did receive funding through that program, through the legislature, for $297,740. So therefore, because of that, we did issue a contract. It was awarded to Sierra Rock and Dirt in October 2003. The final construction cost of that was over almost $92,000. But this cleanup, again, was started as a no further action VCP, but really it didn't work because as construction continued, we found more contamination than the sampling initially indicated. In other words, it kept expanding, so we basically ran out of money before we got the cleanup accomplished, and that's what happened there. There's more contamination than there was dollars to remove, so therefore we had to submit another grant to DNRC under this program, and the amount requested, again, was $300,000, and we went to the Long Range Planning Committee and then to the 2005 legislature, and that was approved again. So in the meantime, though, we did actually complete a voluntary cleanup plan that was approved by the DEQ. And for those of you who haven't seen a voluntary cleanup plan, this is it. And it's very technically oriented, and it's not an easy task to accomplish. No. I'd have been lucky to come up with the title. And this is, we'll talk about some funding. Oh, I didn't have a chance to put in the slides here what the actual cleanup costs were, just the cost of cleanup, the direct cost, I mean, and not all of the analysis and so forth. I did have hard copies of those, though, for those of you that are interested in looking at those. And I also put down the percent of each activity of the total funding required to clean it up. How much was spent on consultants and so forth. So you talk about consultants here. The consultant services cost over that $1 million, or no, just the direct cleanup cost was almost 34% of the total cost. We spent a total of over $250,000 just on consultant services for this project. And consultants don't come inexpensive. It does cost money to retain these technical people to put all these grant applications together, the voluntary cleanup plan. It's not an easy process. But the actual construction of this over $750,000 was 55% just for the construction. So basically, a little over half of all the funding was available was for construction, the actual remediation of the work. And then the other things, you know, the landfill charges for various things, the roundhouse demolition, you know, was $6,000 just to remove the roundhouse. Landfill legal notices, PCB disposal. We found some PCBs and some transformers that were in the roundhouse. We had to dispose of them properly. DEQ oversight was $63,000 almost. The Department of Revenue, we had to pay several $1,000s to 1% gross receipt tax, I think that was. And just disposal of other things. Some of the things, we had 85 tons of railroad ties that were stored on that property to remove. And that was done by a Century Companies. They hauled them for free for us, you know, as a community project. But we did have to dispose of them at the landfill, and that cost some money. We had to haul, they were hauled to Great Falls. Well, anyway, we did complete the voluntary cleanup plan then finally, and this is what was actually removed, oh boy, from the site. 959 tons of diesel diesel waste that came out of, we had to actually excavate and remove the diesel from groundwater that was floating on it. The metals contaminated soils, primarily lead, over 8,000 tons. There were 4 sumps there that were put in, and we had to remove those. There was hours and hours of concrete demolition that was removed with a large track hole jackhammer type device, and that was, we were able to dispose of that on site. And the roundhouse removal again, the railroad ties, and then the revegetation. You know, it doesn't look like a lot of land was actually disturbed for that, but but it doesn't take much land to accumulate tons and tons of material to remove. So, okay, you know, and this is just kind of what some of the cleanup activities occurred. I mean, you wouldn't think that this was a huge operation, you know, and it really wasn't, I guess, but there was just a single track hole or two that was working. We had many belly dump trucks that were keeping the road hot between here and the landfill in Great Falls. And so this was here, rock and dirt at work. That was some for remediation there, and the hydrocarbons. This was some of the hydrocarbon, or petroleum, I mean, on groundwater that was removed. And this is what some of the excavated area looks like. It wasn't really deep or anything, but the lead, contaminated soil had to be removed. And basically, I believe the lead actually came from railroad ballast that was hauled in there from the refinery, probably in Great Falls, during their railroad activities that were undergoing in the early days. Let's see. Okay, we were that's what I thought I had one on the topsoil placement, but maybe not. Well, anyway, this is when this last, not this growing season, but the one before, where seedlings were becoming established there. We were able to place the topsoil. We did have what we call the frog ponds in Lewistown. We restored the fisheries in town. We had 2 ponds that were pretty well filled in with sedimentation, and we had that sediment tested, and we were able to use that as some really excellent topsoil for the brewery flats that we hauled in from there. And we stockpiled it on the site, and then later spread it out and reseeded on the topsoil there. Oh, that's the top. Yeah, that's just the top placement there. Well, this is a view of the early days, and you can see on the lower left there where that stream, Spring Creek, was channelized there, and it has since been, that has been filled in, and the stream re-meandered, and this is some of the railroad activities that were occurring on that site in the 1910 area, roughly. So it gives you a good overview of, and then you can see where the stream here is just being diverted back to the meanders that were originally located on the site. And that along the road there, that the stream does no longer runs there, but it's in the meandered channels now, and it's just an excellent project. And okay, let's see. Oh, okay. This is just kind of an overview of the Brewery Flat site itself, and it's kind of a grainy photograph there, but kind of gives you an idea of what the site is. It's really a beautiful open space now. It does have covenants placed on the site. It was only cleaned up to recreational standards. So we wouldn't have had enough money to do it to residential standards. So there are covenants placed, so it can never be used for housing developments or something like that. So the city will be retaining the site as an open space. And there are some groups that would like to see soccer fields placed on this site. I don't know if that's appropriate. That'll have to be a community decision in order to proceed with that. And then finally, this was the Conoco refinery site in the early days too. After that, it was the stockyards for quite a long time. And then now that is basically, that's all gone. And it's open space as well, with the hydrocarbons contamination just landfilled there. And then finally we've got the old roundhouse there that is undergoing demolition at this time. So you know, we did keep a chronology of events with the history of the project, you know, starting back in the mid-'80s, and there's about 5 pages of chronology, date by date, what happened on these dates and so forth. So we do have a pretty good history of the activities that occurred there, and so we do have that record. And so that kind of gives a rundown of the Brewery Flats site. The Superfund Technical Assessment and Response was an analytical report that was done by the EPA through URS operating systems at one time. So you're welcome to look at some of these assessments, but if you want a copy of the actual cleanup cost, and it's not in these, that won't be on the PowerPoint slide, you're welcome to pick that up as well. So I think that kind of gives you a brief history of the cleanup of the Brewery Flats. It's now, again, a well-used open space that's good for bird watching, trail, hiking, jogging, or whatever, and then the fishing that's along Spring Creek too, a blue urban trout stream. So it's well used by the public, and I think it's a real asset to our community. And again, if you're faced with projects like this, I encourage you to keep going with them, and eventually you'll have some real community asset that will be a credit to your community if you keep at it and don't lose heart. Yeah. All right.
Does anyone have any questions? Questions?
You know, Dwayne, wasn't one of your partners the Montana Conservation Corps kids that came in and did some work to establish those trails?
Yeah, we on the trail work, we do most of our trail work through the recreational trails program through the Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, and then we contract with oftentimes with the Montana Conservation Corps to provide some assistance in actually establishing those trails. We've got with the rare abandonment of the Burlington Northern Santa Fe rail corridor through town, we've just recently acquired over 14 miles of former railway corridor through town. Half of that is in town, half in the rural area, and that's a rail banking program, and it's the first rail banking program in the state of Montana. So that's an excellent resource for the community as well. And we've established trails so far on all of the in part town, the part that's in town, and then the part that's outside of town. The corridor's there, the ballast is there, it's used by horse groups now, equestrian trail, just off the corridor, but we don't actually have a good walking trail surface on that part yet. That's still to come.
Sir, you
Yep.
have a question from the,
No,
you answered it?
Yeah.
Okay. Does anyone else have any other questions? You know, we're at the end of the day. Everybody's fine. So,
They're all thinking about the Iron Horse or something like that.
yeah, you're all good about that. So the schedule for the rest of the day is, we have a little bit of a break, and we're meeting back at the same location that we had the opening sessions and lunch. We're gonna have a really quick, as in 1 minute wrap up, and then we're gonna, if you want, you're not being forced to go by any stretch of your imagination. You can definitely get into your car and go home, but we're having a tour of the sawmill site. We're gonna get on buses and go at 4:30. We're gonna meet right here, where there are buses, we'll take you. So, meander back to the site we were at this morning, and then we will get going. Thank you all so much.
What's that?
My animation.
Do you think it'll be on the PowerPoint when she downloads it?
It will.
That way?
What I'm gonna do, whoa. Yeah, what I'm gonna do is send the CD.
Now, where is Lewis?
Talk about community planning at Brownsfield. I know lots about community planning and very little about Brownsfield, so bear with me. First slide is just a picture of the Anaconda smelter in Asarco smelter, in East Helena. I just thought that was an interesting photo to put in. I'm going to talk about the top tier of land use planning in Montana, which is the growth policy, which is typically known as a master plan or a comprehensive plan in most other states. So what is a growth policy? Where do Brownsfields fit in? Brownsfields and local growth policies, and then the importance of a growth policy to Brownsfield's project, specifically with regards to, I'll talk about the Old Rosary Hospital in Miles City. So what is a growth policy? It's found under Title 76, Chapter 1, Part 6 of the Montana Code Annotated. Growth policies throughout the state. I apologize, this isn't a PowerPoint, it's a PDF. My PowerPoint will not work, so we're losing all of the animation. The covers you see are Teton County, Billings, Yellowstone, and Lewistown, the growth policies.
our last session of the day.
Yes, sir.
The kids are starting to lose focus, I think.
Don't worry, I'll keep them awake. The Montana Supreme Court has indicated in case law that the growth policy is considered the preeminent planning tool for comprehensive jurisdiction-wide planning. This is based upon a court case that was decided in 2006. So even our Supreme Court has indicated the preeminence of the growth policy in land use planning. A lot of people ask, why is it a growth policy and not a comprehensive plan or a master plan? Well, in 1999, the legislature of the state passed a new planning statute that changed the term from master plan or comprehensive plan to growth policies. But under our statute, all three terms are synonymous, or even general plan. You'll see general plan, I believe, in California is pretty typical. Also, the legislature established minimum requirements for growth policies. Essentially, there's a minimum checklist that a jurisdiction has to meet to create such a document. The big difference between Montana's master plan growth policy statute is that it's optional. It is not mandatory for any jurisdiction in the state to do a growth policy. There are certain reasons you have to do a growth policy, such as if you want to do zoning, and other types of specific land use regulations. Essentially, a growth policy is meant to provide a rational framework for decision-making. It should allow a jurisdiction to decide where its resources are going to be committed, how land use issues are going to be managed, and who's going to do what, where, and when. This is a map of the state of Montana with the municipalities, cities and towns that are either have adopted growth policies or in the process. The dark red, and it doesn't show up very well, I apologize, are those jurisdictions that do have growth policies, and the tan are those jurisdictions in the process. And surprisingly, you'd think most of them would be concentrated in the western part of the state, but that is not the case. This is a map of the counties in the state showing those jurisdictions in the dark brown that do have adopted growth policies, those in tan that are in process, and those in the light red that do not have a document at all. So brownfields and a growth policy. If a community has a possible brownfield project, at least in my estimation, it's a good idea to discuss that in the document. And as I talked about earlier, there are minimum requirements for a growth policy, issues that have to be discussed in the map, with maps and text. And I just threw out 4 of them, and one is land use, housing, public facilities, and environment. Those are 4 ideal topics within a growth policy, master plan, general plan, whatever you want to call it, that you'd want to talk about such things. You've got land use issues such as White Pine Sash in Missoula, the Arsaco Smelter in East Helena, Smelter Hill in Great Falls. Those are perfect land use issues. There's housing issues such as the Old Rosary Hospital in Miles City, the Lewistown Nurses School. With regards to public facilities,